We all think of racism as a Southern issue. We think of the North as moral and righteous. But in reality, racism was just as real in the North.
But aside from the two senators, there was another man who was the subject of placards, Judge W. Arthur Garrity, Jr. The general consensus was that Garrity deserved to be hanged.
In 1974, a federal judge ruled that schools in Boston were segregated and ordered them to desegregate by way of busing. Kids in Boston would be bused from Roxbury, a black area, to South Boston, an Irish-American community. The Catholic Church was historically a powerful presence in Boston, and citizens looked to their religious leaders to guide them. There was also a history of English Protestants discriminating against the Irish Catholics. Black people were also treated as inferior, and they were still a step down from the Irish Catholics, so the Irish felt as though they could join with the rest of the white community in their collective superiority. When the federal government demanded that busing be enforced, the Irish Catholics felt as though they were demoted to the same level as the blacks, losing what little status they had. Richard Cushing became Cardinal of Boston in 1944. He was a folksy, well-liked man. He spent his time fundraising for the church and had a substantial amount of political power.
Cardinal Cushing, Archbishop of Boston, came as pontifical legate to perform the dedication. From American Catholics, he had brought £60,000, 1/10 of the cost of the cathedral. The Cardinal proceeded to bless the exterior.
During the 1960s, as the civil rights movement started to heat up, Cushing took a stance in favor of the black community. However, he was reluctant to commit to anything along the lines of civil disobedience. Two incidents changed his mind. The first was during the St. Patrick's Day parade, where the black community decided to enter in the parade, carrying a banner with President Kennedy's face, which read, "From the fight for Irish to the fight for U.S. equality." They were met with violence. Tomatoes, cherry bombs, eggs, and beer cans were chucked at the black paraders. The second incident that influenced Cushing was when two priests were arrested for trying to integrate a restaurant in North Carolina. These were the first American priests to be arrested for civil rights action. After the arrest, Cushing gave a speech declaring, "To every believer, I say love all men and especially love Negroes because they have suffered so much from lack of love." Although this speech was a big step for Cushing in the direction of racial integration, some felt that he could still have better used his political power to help the black community. During the late 60s, Cushing was hesitant to respond directly to the demands of black people. He had acquired a tremendous amount of debt from building new churches around the state, and was not willing to risk angering wealthy Catholics whom he relied on for money and were critical of racial integration. When Cushing fell sick in 1970, the Pope asked Medeiros to be his successor. Medeiros was born in Portugal and grew up in Fall River, Massachusetts. As he grew up, Medeiros proved to be a genius, graduating at the top of his class and even earning his doctorate. When he came to Boston, though, he felt a great deal of discrimination that made it difficult for him to make an impact in the community. As much as Medeiros tried to connect to the people by attending sports games, parades for St. Patrick's Day, funerals, and more, he was still always the odd one out because he did not have the folksy, sporty appeal that Cushing had. For example, many would make fun of him because he, unlike Cushing, had an emotional side and would cry at ceremonies such as funerals. In addition, Cushing was Irish, which contrasted greatly to Medeiros' Portuguese ethnicity and added to the diocese's dislike for Medeiros. Many liberals had high expectations for Medeiros because of his earlier work in Brownsville, Texas, in which he devoted his energy to help underprivileged minorities. This work had showed that Medeiros was a capable leader. Disappointingly, contrary to his work in Texas, when Medeiros took office in Boston, right from the start he seemed overwhelmed and did not make a lot of effort to enforce racial integration. After the desegregation of Boston was ordered, Medeiros was very cautious, as he did not want to stir up any more trouble with the Irish resentment he was dealing with as a Portuguese. Just a year after Medeiros became cardinal, all 16 members of the Archdiocesan Human Rights Commission threatened to resign unless he spoke more forcefully on issues regarding race and poverty. When he finally spoke about the busing issue, he said that it may not be the most desirable way to integrate, but it's all we have right now. Later, when Irish families started sending their children to private Catholic schools to avoid racial integration, Medeiros put a limit on the number of children who could be enrolled at one time. This limit proved ineffective as nobody followed the rule, and Medeiros took no further enforcement or action in general to stop them from doing this. This hesitance from choosing a solid stance on racial integration and not taking any action remained for all of his term. The Roman Catholic Church had a lot of influence and power in Boston, but they failed to implement their authority to combat racial injustice. Even if Medeiros had spoken up, his own struggle with race would have prevented him from making a difference. The busing crisis conflict was also intensified by the fact that the Irish Catholics and the Protestants had a rocky past. It seemed as though desegregation was the Protestants getting back at the Catholics. Some people might think that Medeiros could have done more. Others might think that he tried his best. Looking back through a modern lens, the Catholic Church's role in the busing crisis provides another important part of the story that should not be forgotten.